Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Your Excellencies, all the delegates. It's a pleasure to welcome you today. My name is Ridi Tlhabi, and I'll be your moderator for the next 3 hours. Our plenary session in the next 3 hours is looking at mobilizing means of implementation for food systems transformation. We've got 2 parts to our sessions today, but the first part will be looking at financing windows for food systems transformation. I just want to remind you very briefly of what we've been doing and the conversations we've been having in the last couple of days so that all our sessions are speaking to each other. On Monday, we heard from heads of states and representatives of governments about their efforts to mobilize domestic resources, domestic financial resources to transform food systems. Now, we also heard about the challenges that they are facing, and it was very, very clear that it is simply not enough for them to rely on their domestic efforts. We need to complement their domestic efforts, particularly in these tight fiscal situations. But I think there was a moment of inspiration as we heard about an innovative tool that was crafted by the World Bank and IFAD to support and complement domestic efforts at resource mobilization. A case study that was very inspiring and energizing was Niger. We heard from the Prime Minister of Niger how with a combination of this financial tool, the 3Fs food systems financial tool that was piloted in Niger and holds so much promise, we saw how that and political will has helped Niger to move the needle. And by this I mean that country was able to increase food system spending by 69%. 69%, and that is a bold resource mobilization that can be scaled up and holds promise, particularly for low-income countries. So that is what today is all about. We want to ask the question. The needs have been articulated, the advocacy has been amplified. How do we scale up on action? Where is the money going to come from? And how do we ensure that it goes to the right people? We will have this conversation for the next couple of hours. I'm going to ask all our speakers to please watch the clock. The presentations this morning and the interventions are very urgent if we are to achieve our goal, mobilizing means of implementation for food systems transformation. Please just watch the clock, and I will wear my headmistress hat if you are speaking too long, gently and diplomatically interrupt you. To get us started this morning, let us welcome, or help me welcome, His Excellency, the Deputy Minister of Eswatini, my neighbors in South Africa, Your Excellency Themba Masuku.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Dear delegates, food systems, as we have learned, are the complex networks of people, processes, and resources that produce, distribute, and consume food. They are essential for human health, environmental sustainability, and economic development. We are aware that today's food systems are facing multiple crises. They are responsible for a large share of greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity loss, water pollution, and soil degradation. They fall short in providing adequate nutrition and livelihoods for billions of people around the world, both in rural and urban areas. They are vulnerable to shocks such as climate change, pandemics, conflicts, and economic downturn. These challenges require urgent and fundamental transformation of food systems. The question is, how do we, as countries, inculcate and lead this transformation? The Kingdom of Eswatini started by organizing the food systems dialogues for a number of stakeholders ranging from government institutions, private sector players, civil society, and farmer organizations. The outcome of these engagements, which are our food systems pathways, are owned and led not only by government, but all the various players that are expected to implement same. Going forward, it is necessary to have regular platforms to inform policy and regulatory changes that will sustain the implementation of our food systems. Over and above legislative and policy frameworks, such regular platforms help to bring awareness to various practitioners on the new approaches and opportunities for sustainable food systems, hence building resilience of the food systems approach itself. Secondly, financing of the food system has to be improved to incentivize investments and transition to resilient production systems. It has been indicated that many promising innovations lack the financial resources to scale up and reach their potential impact. Therefore, funding mechanisms need to be more inclusive, flexible, and risk-tolerant to support a diversity of innovators and innovations. In Eswatini, the government has established a special purpose vehicle in the form of the Eswatini Agriculture Development Fund, which will help mobilize resources and deploy tailored financing products for a number of players in the value chains, including producers, processors, aggregators, research, and development, thus enabling and creating circularity in the agriculture and food industries. This facility is designed to link to private financing institutions to cushion their risks and unlock more capital flows into food systems that favor smallholder producers, including targeting youth and women, low carbon technologies, high diversity, and high value activities that generate long-term returns and sustainability. Further, it will help government to also mobilize social capital for financing inclusive, nutrition-sensitive, and environmentally friendly agribusiness. The last but most important means of implementation of food systems transformation is the establishment of robust agriculture and food information systems. Such integrated systems include early warning systems, digital database for all players in the food systems and their activities, market observatory systems for both input and produce markets. Rolling out such systems can help generate data and improve evidence-based planning and decision-making by all players in the food systems, thus strengthening accountability and governance structures. The government of the Kingdom of Eswatini will continue to pursue and perfect these enabling pathways for our food systems by ensuring that they are included as priority policy actions for government. We take this opportunity to sincerely thank our development partners, including FAO, WFP, and the African Development Bank for early support that they have put through in these early stages of our food systems transformation phase. We also encourage partners present here to also endeavor to partner with developing and least developed countries to transform our agriculture and food industries and make a better world for all. I just want to end by saying we have one dying planet. We have an increasing population. We need to act not tomorrow, but now. I thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for the urgency of your message. And I just want to emphasize a part of your speech where you talked about the urgency of creating regular platforms to sustain food systems transformation. Those two words, regular and sustain, are very close to the hearts of the World Bank and IFAD. In all our conversation, we have been focusing on how we transform so that we're not moving from crisis to crisis. That is the long-term view, to have a sustained and transformed financial architecture that can support food systems transformation, particularly in low-income countries. Thank you so very much. So I've spoken about how IFAD and the World Bank are leading the way here, and how the 3 Fs have created the potential for what can be achieved. A financial prototype to measure financial flows to food systems to support domestic mobilization. So let's see right now. Let's start with the ODA to complement domestic resources. Where do we stand on that? And can we move the needle on ODA flows to food systems? And to help us through that conversation, it is a pleasure to invite on stage Donald Brown, Associate Vice President, Program Management Department, and Chris Brett, Lead Agribusiness Specialist for the World Bank. The floor is yours. Yes, start with your presentation.
Okay. I'm looking to see if my presentation is on the screen as we're getting that loaded. I just want to say that it's been a real fantastic pleasure to work with IFAD on developing what we call this 3FS tool. You've heard a lot about it. You saw a little bit of taster when it came to the work of the country of Niger that we presented on Monday. But what I want to do today is to say to you that we've also done this work related to the general or the global ODA, the Overseas Development Assistance. So as I go through this presentation, I want people to sort of realize that when you look at this tool, you're seeing very much summary data. Behind it, there's been a tremendous amount of work on the methodology, where we've been looking in a very, very detailed way on analyzing all the financial codes within governments and the financial codes through the OEC data, really looking at how we measure financial flows into these key pillars. These key pillars actually don't represent just agriculture. They represent the cross-ministerial work, the finances that are going into the infrastructure for food systems, the rural infrastructure, such a key area to make farmers competitive, give them access to markets, give them access to inputs. We also look here at the area of the agricultural development and value chain. Many people, organizations have been very, very focused on agricultural productivity, increasing, intensifying production. A very, very straightforward way of what many of us have been doing in the past, but also taking a value chain approach. Value chain meaning just not what we're doing on the farm, but how we bring those products to market. We also look, and this is the area that is expressing concern, the growing funding into social protection and food assistance. This is immediate needs. Then, of course, all the talk about climate change, natural resources, is the talk translating into finance, into investment, adaptation, change. Also, you see there the importance of nutrition and how we're trying to isolate and look at nutrition to where we are. So let's look at this global ADA. You've seen what we did in Niger, the same methodology being applied to this data. And when we look at this data now, what we're trying to show people here, we've looked at 2018, 19, 20, 21. 2022 data is coming out very soon. You can see in global ODA, and we've broken this into these pillars, it's the first time we've taken the financial flows, not just on agriculture, but across these systems. So we're looking at nutrition, the infrastructure, the climate change, the agricultural development, and then of course the last one is about the social assistance. I really want to stress to this group, when you look at these numbers, you can see the red area has grown quite considerably. You can see in 2020 there's a spike because of COVID. But in 2021, the financial flows have gone down slightly. But importantly, it's gone from 11.3 billion to over $14 billion into this area of the assistance. In a way, you can argue this is taking money, which of course is of huge value and need at the short term, but it's taking money from the long-term investment. We see agricultural development going from 11.1 billion to 10.9. So not a huge difference, but it's showing it's not going in the right direction. Climate change finance or climate support for adaptation has gone from 7.28 billion to 9.18 billion from the global ODA stance. That doesn't really translate into adaptation and really building a lot of the issues around the climate crisis we're facing. And you can see the issues here about rural infrastructure, and you can see that nutrition is quite stagnant at 3.78 billion when we say how important this area is. So you can see there's a 9% drop in the ODA from the peak amount. Just moving through these slides, the last area I want to highlight to the audience here, we all represent, we're all representing the various countries. We have this window one looking at the public sector at the country level. But what we're trying to do here is also show that the actual global ODA rate has, as you can see, has basically gone down slightly in terms of ODA to food systems by proportion to global ODA. So where is the importance of food system? Slightly down from a few years ago. You know, and of course, we're in that point now of real crisis where we need to be. I'm just going to finish on this slide where I want to show people that when we look at DAC and multilaterals on how this finance is going from ODA from the DAC members and from multilaterals. Obviously multilaterals being the World Bank as well as the other organizations like the European Union and so on. So here our last slide is basically saying where is the finance going? And I think this slide, last one, but very, very important to show the audience here, that the bilateral DAC members are putting 30.4% of their budgets into global emergency assistance. And 29% of multilaterals is going into the emergency assistance. So really, the big takeaway from our analysis here is that we complement each other between multilaterals and DAC. There's no two ways about that. But the challenge is there is not enough finance going into global change, really moving the needle between government, multilaterals, ODA, and so on. So our next job, our next task is really to analyze the finance across the private sector within this space. We want to blend the financial structure into the financing of food systems and agriculture and food systems from the private sector into this area. So you can see these numbers. These will be being made public very shortly. But I just want to thank sincerely all the partners that have helped us develop this. But my sincere thanks, of course, goes to the Hub for bringing us together, and of course to the IFAD membership and collaboration that we've had for the last year in developing this, and we're planning our way forward. So thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Chris. And Donald, I would like to get your impressions on the significance of what we've just seen this morning.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much. I've had no sneak preview of that slideshow, so you're getting my comments as they come. I mean, firstly, I think it's fascinating. Secondly, I think we're at the tip of an iceberg. So the real challenge here is for us to get under those numbers, and as Chris said, to look at the other flows beyond ODA, the private sector, the government flows. My third thought is exactly what Chris is outlining. In many ways, the increasing resources, for obvious reasons, are going to humanitarian responses rather than that longer-term investment in food systems. They're complementary, but unless we address the longer term, we're going to have to invest even more in the shorter term, and that humanitarian investment is not sustainable. So we have to look at that longer term. You know, that striking figure of 9% drop in ODA. But for me, it's not just about ODA. It's very much about the government investment, the private sector investment. And so we really need to understand that. But also, it's not just about the amount of money. It's about the quality of investment, the targeting of that investment, and really get that comprehensive mapping and really work out, you know, not just how much is going in, but are we using that limited resource to fund the right things in the right way? Thank you.
So, Donald, again, on the key value of your financial institutions in funding food systems transformation that reaches SMEs, small to medium enterprises, including small producers and operators. We spoke quite extensively about them yesterday. What is the key of your, the key value of your financial institutions?
Thank you. Well, maybe I should start by returning the compliment to the World Bank. It's a pleasure working with the World Bank, but also I think that's part of the response here, is IFAD has a specific niche, and part of our niche is working with larger IFIs to blend our resources, because IFAD has a focus on looking at the very poor in the food systems, the last mile, as we call it. IFAD was born out of a failure of the food systems in the late 60s, early 70s, and as we see, is still extremely relevant today, sadly, in that context. And what we tend to do, focusing on particularly on the small producers and the rural poor, is we've always taken a holistic view. So right through from food production and processing, access, nutrition, rural infrastructure, but also natural resource management and climate change adaptation, which is so key to the poor, to the rural poor. So we've taken that holistic view. We recently did a stock take of all our current operations about 3 months ago, looking at food systems, and actually what was pleasantly surprising, but unplanned, was the fact that actually every single project was oriented in one way or another to aspects of the food systems. So we invest about, currently we've got about an $8 billion investment, but by working and co-financing with both international partners like the World Bank and governments, we add an additional 11 billion onto that. So it's about a $20 billion investment focused on that. I think the second thing I'd say is we've got nearly 50 years experience of focusing on some of the most fragile environments, and you know, food systems is complex. Getting the right investments in food systems is complex, and it's good to see that our investments focus on the 4 desired outcomes, about equitable livelihoods, about adaptation to climate change, environmental sustainability, nutrition, and increased resilience. So I think, you know, we're focused in the right way. I think the second thing that's really important is IFAD works through governments, through populations. So we listen and align with national and local priorities and national visions for rural transformation and food systems. So, you know, for us, it's for sustainability of investment, it's crucial that we're working through and with governments and their vision. And I think that's something which is important. And my last point would be around ensuring that very limited resources, as we saw in Chris's presentation, are used properly. And so I was very proud to see in the recent report by the Center for Global Development that IFAD came up as the #1 institution in terms of the quality of ODA, because I think that's really important. There's very limited resources, and we need to ensure that they're invested well. And 2 areas they really picked out was the transparency of our investments, but also the results-driven approach. And I think we're pleased to be able to ensure that the international community can be confident their resources are being invested well, but more importantly, that the countries that are taking those investments are getting the results that they want. So I think, you know, there's some really tough choices about ensuring limited investment gets invested well. Thank you.
And Chris, same to you, the key value?
Well, I think when it comes to the World Bank, I just want to sort of frame out. I mean, I'm sitting in the agriculture and food global practice. And in our portfolio, as we closed our financial year on June the 30th, we have a lending of $28 billion across our portfolio to the public sector. That's $28 billion. That's gone up considerably through, obviously, a lot of increased funding for short-term food security issues, but also looking at longer-term investments through climate adaptation and so on. And out of that portfolio, 45% actually is allocated supporting smallholder SME development. So that takes us down to about like $13 billion, which is a considerable sum of money that's being directed into support to farmers. And I want to say economic support. This is about not just increasing productivity, but lots of off-farm support and linkages to markets as well. And one of our interesting areas is we really worked hard on developing what we call the productive alliance model. This is the linkage of SME, smallholder producers, to the private sector, to off-takers. And this is where you invest in an economic asset, like a warehouse, like a cool chain type system, a place where people come to do their business. It can be extension support, import support, places for sale. And this is where there's aggregation points to bring the smallholder products, through the system to markets. These have had a huge positive impact in terms of livelihoods. And what we're seeing interesting, of course, is when you develop a productive alliance, you develop a lot of agri-services around it. So it's not just about the agricultural productivity, it's engaging in the technology linkages, it's engaging in a huge amount of ways of doing research and development and being demand-led from the markets. So this area we see as being important, but more interestingly, it really does drive youth engagement because the youth really do enjoy the agricultural services. This could be mechanization services. We've been a large supporter of Hello Tractor, as many of you know, the Uberization of the tractor equipment. So a lot of value being brought. We have an extensive teams on the ground, extensive partnerships, obviously, mentioning IFAD, but others as well, that help to deliver this work. But in the last financial year, more importantly, we're getting closer at mobilizing and increasing private sector investment around public sector programs. So we looked at the recent numbers, and we've generated about $600 million of private sector investment across 15 projects or programs that we've been funding over the last few years. But that's an area that we're looking to scale. Many of you know about the International Finance Corporation, the IFC. They have their investment services, they have their advisory services. We're working strongly with the IFC. We call it MAS, their Manufacturing, Agribusiness and Services Division. And on the agribusiness side, they're looking constantly on where they can build a good, solid investments. But the last point I want to say is that we've acknowledged in discussions yesterday in the private sector, in other areas of discussion, agriculture is still a high-risk business for all parties. Whether you're a smallholder, whether you're the private sector, even through to the consumer, it's high risk because consumer prices are going up and down. But it's also challenging for many areas of the production cycle. So we're looking at lots of new tools where we do matching grants to help SMEs, and the matching grant is a way of de-risking. It's a way of giving them the opportunity of establishing a program, an investable pipeline that can be then taken to commercial banks as it evolves through the matching grant and scale up finance. So really just want to say is that our challenge going forward is really looking at commercializing smallholders, formalizing smallholders, and really building them into viable business units. And I do stress the business unit side. Smallholders, of course, private sector. We talk about them as though they're on their own, but they are a private sector. They're growing to sell. They're growing to consume and to sell. So very, very important that they are integrated more into the value chains. Just the last comment is that the last time there was a survey done on the integration of smallholders to markets, it was found that only 9% of farmers are actually contracted by the end user. And that's something we want to shift the needle on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Donald Brown and Chris Brett. Really appreciate it. Thank you. You can leave the stage. Thank you. And Chris made reference to what I thought was a robust conversation yesterday with the private sector, both identifying the inefficiencies, identifying how far off target we are in achieving SDGs, but also reckoning with the fact that the private sector is expected to contribute 50% of the financing to the financing of attainment of the SDGs, and that we are not on target on many pillars, whether it's environment, human rights, support for smallholder farmers and SMEs, and so on. So that conversation was quite candid and robust. But today, we do want to move the needle, a conversation between development banks, impact investors, and small businesses in need of capital. What can we do now, and what can we do better? To help me in that conversation, please help me welcome Michael Schorske, Pegasus Capital, operating partner. That's a conversation with the private sector. Please come forward, Michael. We are going to be joined also by Giancarlo Sandrin, Legal General, Investment Management, LGIM. We also have Malala Rabanero, SME, Madagascar, Loveland Nena Ejirmer, Farmer and SME from Nigeria. Thank you for joining us. Take a seat and let's get started with our conversation. Michael, let me start with you as our partners are moving forward. My first question, I want to find out how your company specifically influences private sector to incentivize sustainable investment in traditionally, and we've been hearing about it from Chris and Donnell, traditionally less attractive low-income countries for food system transformation. We spoke yesterday about how difficult it is for low-income countries because the infrastructure is not conducive. The infrastructure is not ideal. The private sector goes to where it can make profits. But the fact of the matter is that we do need this blended financing to help them just scale up. So what is your company doing in that regard?
Great. Is this on? Yes. So I'm an operating partner at Pegasus Capital, and I think blended finance is a perfect description of what we do. So we catalyze investment in the food system space because, first of all, we are the private sector. We're part of the private sector. We are a private equity firm that invests equity into greenfield projects in emerging markets in the global south. And the way we've done that and the way that incentive works is really through the way that we've structured our fund with the Green Climate Fund, who is a key partner of ours, in two private equity vehicles. And that what I call catalytic capital, right? The Green Climate Fund provides a percentage in one fund is 20% of our capital. That's first loss capital with a certain cap on its return. So that then provides an incentive to an institutional investor that's looking at the alternative space to invest in our fund because there's first loss that exists as an quote insurance policy if we don't do our job well. And there's also upside potential because of the limitation on return of GCF's money. And in exchange for that, GCF has asked us, and we willingly go to the global south. And frankly, like there's this discussion, and I think it's kind of framing. We were talking a little bit about this last night. Like if in the alternatives world, the investment world anyhow, everyone's chasing kind of the same stuff, right? I mean, not to get into the finance world, but like I see this as an opportunity. Like, you know, it's like, oh, you know, it's, yes, there's a bunch of need for solution out there, but that's an opportunity for an investor that does her or his work.
Giancarlo, again, this came up yesterday when we looked at the statistics that were quite sobering, and I'm talking here about the 2021 World Benchmarking Alliance, and I was completely stunned that only 9% of the companies that were observed demonstrated any commitment to improving or attaining the living wage for workers. That was 9%, if I'm not mistaken, and the 8% on greenhouse gas emissions in line with the Paris Agreement. So when we talk about transformative investments, there is a reason for that. It is because the numbers are telling us that we are far from achieving our targets. So the question is, if we all agree that these matters are urgent, why are we doing so badly? What do we need to do to positively move the needle and make an impact?
Well, just also an introduction from my side. As legal in general, investment management is one of the largest asset managers in Europe. We manage roughly 1.4 trillion US dollar for mainly pension fund around the world. Maria Ortino, who leads the stewardship team and work on health and food, was not able to be here today, so I'm representing Elgin in her place. So the stewardship team is very relevant within our company because we are owner of both shares and bonds, and we can put pressure on companies to amend their strategies. You were mentioning before the numbers on the climate, for example. On that side, we have also our own climate change program, is the Climate Impact Pledge. So we score 5,000 companies covering 20 climate critical sectors, and we vote against those that do not meet the minimum criteria for us. We have also in-depth engagement with roughly 100 companies around the world, and those companies which are not following, let's say, our guidance in terms of stewardship, if even after the engagement they are not working on that, we disinvest from our Future World fund range, or we vote against the chair of those companies on the other funds. We want to be positive, to transform positively the private sector investments, and we are also, for example, working with ATNI, so the Access to Nutrition Initiative, and Maria is also part of this initiative. We work a lot with food companies in order to set a certain standard, which of course will influence also their behavior and how they work in the different part of the world. Just also because usually we say, okay, many companies are not following the right scoring, they are not really well in line with the expectation. I think this is also going to change. We have seen for example, on the climate change initiative that many companies are starting to do better, to look at also at disclose more information. Just look at the scope-free emission is something that nobody was disclosing 10 years ago. Now we have roughly 13,000 companies disclosing those numbers. Okay. And a final point, remember that ESG investments are growing, and if companies want to be part of these pots of investments, they need also to demonstrate the sustainability within their business.
There is the challenge. Malala, let me bring you in here. Chris mentioned something important about the significance of SMEs, that they are the private sector, and the word small in no way is indicative of your impact. I mean, agri-food SMEs represent 90% of businesses worldwide, responsible for 50% of food production, processing, and distribution, and yet there is a gap between your needs and the investments, the capital investment that are being made in the SME sector. And I'm reading that particularly in the global south, you still face an estimated $160 billion US financing gap. You are one of the SMEs that was able to access some funding to step up your production, your profitability. How difficult was it, and how do we ensure that there are many more SMEs like you? Malala, was my question too long? So I was just giving the statistics just to paint the picture about the challenges. And then you are one of those that managed to access the funding. I want to hear about your journey, about how difficult it was, and how do we ensure that we scale up.
Merci de m'avoir donné la parole et bonjour, honorable assistance. En effet, le défi majeur de Sofiar, qui est notre entreprise, c'est de résoudre l'équation suivante. C'est comment intégrer de manière durable les producteurs dans la chaîne de valeur de l'agrobusiness et de répondre aux normes de qualité et exigences de nos clients, mais aussi de maintenir l'équilibre de l'entreprise et la rentabilité. Ceci n'est pas toujours facile. C'était un parcours difficile depuis la création. Sofiar, on a initié, essayé, avancé, échoué, recommencé, jusqu'à ce qu'on trouve la bonne formule. Donc, cette formule étant de regrouper les acteurs qui gravitent autour de Sofiar pour œuvrer en synergie et contribuer de manière durable à la sécurité alimentaire. Donc, pour Sofiar, la mise en place de l'approche d'agriculture contractuelle inclusive consiste à développer un partenariat commercial avec les organisations, les groupements des producteurs, afin de leur permettre d'accéder au marché durable et rentable, d'accéder à des techniques culturelles innovantes et soucieuses de l'environnement, issues de l'agroécologique et de l'agriculture climato-intelligente, de les intégrer à une démarche qualité. Actuellement, Sofiar dispose d'un mécanisme et dispositif de terrain fonctionnel ainsi qu'un système de suivi et évaluation. Le partenaire, ceci a été possible grâce au partenaire avec FIDA, parce que certes c'est un partenaire récent, mais qui porte déjà ses fruits. Bon, pour schématiser un peu, au bout de 16 ans d'existence de Sofiar, on a par exemple pu créer un emploi permanent de 11 personnes. Un an d'entrée de FIDA, on est à 33 employés, donc c'est 300%. Même chose, l'emploi à temps partiel, on était à 170, maintenant 192. Les producteurs accompagnés, grâce à nos propres moyens, c'était 135 depuis 16 ans. Depuis l'entrée de FIDA, c'est 532. C'est vraiment 400% par là. Et en une année de travail avec FIDA, on a ciblé 2309 producteurs. Donc c'est tout un processus. Donc ça a été possible essentiellement grâce à l'appui de FIDA. C'est aussi l'appui technique et financier de nos partenaires, comme FIDA et autres investisseurs. L'appui institutionnel du gouvernement aussi était important. Et surtout, les partenaires locaux, c'est de mettre en synergie le travail entre les organisations paysannes, les congrégations religieuses, les ONG de développement et beaucoup tant d'autres. Donc, à terme, les objectifs fixés sont, avec le travail avec FIDA, c'est 53 nouveaux emplois permanents, 145 emplois à temps partiel, 230 organisations paysannes regroupant 5000 producteurs soutenus, dont 30% de femmes et 35% de jeunes, 20 000 tonnes de produits absorbés annuels, 200 000 arbres fruitiers plantés, et mise en place d'un fonds de développement pour soutenir les actions sociales. Donc c'est ça qui atténue, parce qu'en tant qu'entreprise à but lucratif, il faut qu'on trouve un système pour que, parce que ce n'est pas une subvention, donc il faut aussi que les producteurs fassent la part des choses. Donc pour conclure, une entreprise privée est bel et bien un acteur de développement, et c'est pourquoi Sofiar apporte sa pierre à l'édifice pour contribuer à l'atteinte des ODD. Merci à vous.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so very much, Malala, for sharing your journey, the difficulties in the early phases, and also what works and the potential ahead. We really appreciate your intervention. Let's come to you, Loveland. Same kind of theme. You and fellow small farmers in Nigeria are engaged in a business partnership with Olam, and Olam is one of the largest agri-businesses in the world, and this brought equitable profits to you as a smallholder. You describe this as a win-win relationship, a win-win situation of smallholder with large agri-businesses. Can you tell us how it actually works?
Yeah. Good day, everyone. Good morning. As a smallholder farmer from Nigeria, we have a lot of activities going on. And in those activities, the very first and foremost thing in working with rural and smallholder farmers is targeting the real rural farmers. Why? Because when you come into any particular country, any particular community, no matter how agrarian connected they have people who are really into agricultural activity, farming per se, with that passion and that grit to make sure that the economy grows. And in all this, identifying the farmers is very, very paramount, because when you identify the farmers and you work with them, you feel happy. It builds trust. Taking it as it is, when we started our activities, we were identified on our farms, not identified on the road. 2, we were given everything that is supposed to be, because one thing with agriculture is when you don't have land, you don't farm. You don't farm in the air. Considering the fact that women generally pose 60 to 70% of the workforce in agricultural sector, it is very, very important that land is made available. And that is one of the major things that IFAD VCDP is doing that we are so much interested in, and we congratulate them for that. They come into each community, they ask for land, we give it out, they develop it. And when they are developing it, we work with them. We don't just say, develop it, and when you are done. No, we work with them to make sure that it is developed. We allot it among ourselves, we work on it. And when Olam came to work with us, yes, Olam has been in the country for years. I know they were not making as much headway as they are making now that IFAD VCDP is assisting into the connect. Because contract farming remains the best when it comes to agriculture. When you are going to the farm, you are sure that somebody is out there to buy from you. It gives you that courage. It gives you a better morale to get into agricultural activity. And when each time it is done, you have a good price, because they don't fix price for us. No. We have our organizations. We come together. We have a committee that fixes these prices. We agree on the price. They buy from us. And not just that they buy. To keep us, they put some incentives. If they are to buy, let's say, 400 per kg, they may say 410 naira to keep us in the circle. And we make sure that in our measurement, if it is said to be 50, 100, 1,000, there is no drop of grain. That is the trust. And when that is done, you see that the win-win situation there is very perfect, because you coming has that trust that I will deliver. Me coming to you have the same trust that you will deliver. So when it comes to inputs, they provide inputs timely, because agriculture is time-bound. And when you miss it, you lose it. There is no second chance, except if there is irrigation facility. And that is what we are equally clamoring for, because in a situation whereby farmers are given the opportunity to come together and work with the big nuts, agriculture tribes. And who are the big nuts? Those who have that private sector-oriented mentality, who have made the money, because most of the time they say that when you give farmers money, it's a wasted fund, or there is so much risk. I don't believe in that now, because there are so many de-risking factors in some of the countries like Nigeria. We have NISA, which is just there to de-risk our activities, to make it easier. And we have the insurance companies. We work with them. We don't work in isolation. Climate effects must always be there. And based on that, the insurance is there, the NISAL is there to make sure that all these things work. Again, we have seen that it is very, very important for us in the course of our activities. And we have told Olam, each time, and all those are not just Olam, but Olam is the biggest player in the system. So each time we mention Olam, it doesn't mean that others are not there. But we have told them, look, when we want to go into these arrangements and contracts, make sure that all those who are supposed to be seated are seated, and they are doing it with the help of IFA VCDP. And we are doing this to make sure that nobody is being put at the back. Because if that happens, there will be a problem. And in processing aspects, if you don't process very well, you don't have a good market. And if you don't package very well, you don't have a good market. Meaning that the value chain development program, which is from production to marketing, is a perfect idea. And if we have to do anything about food system, and it is not fully in that system method, the transformation is not there. So based on that, we are still saying, and we mean it, that any country, any continent, even a world that doesn't have food is like a world that is baseless, a world that is full of void. And for us, it is very, very important that the rural smallholder farmers who contribute more than 80% of the food me and you eat every day are involved. And that is why in Nigeria we have one slogan we say, if you have eaten each time, say thank you to the farmer. Because that food that you are eating comes from us.
Yes.
So each time you eat, say thank you to the rural women farmers, because we are there always. We go to the farm, we work, we come back to the house, we still cook and give you the food to eat it.
Yes.
So based on that,
Thank you, Loveland.
we have decided to make it so imperative that we work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Loveland. And so I will, because of where you left it off, I will steal one more question then, Michael, that what do we need to do then to scale up investment so that people like Loveland continue to feed us all and keep us healthy and alive? What do we need to do to scale up investments?
I think we need to demonstrate success at a small scale. You know, from a investor perspective, there's nothing like performance to attract more capital. So I'm fond of saying, at least to our institutional investors and to the Green Climate Fund, okay, we're not going to go and take an aggressive bet, but if we can invest a small amount of money in a private transaction in a particular country, and it proves successful, you know, 50 of those types of investments start to develop a wonderful track record that then brings more capital into this space. So I think the direct answer is a lot of wins and successes along the way will beget more capital so that we can do this at scale.
Giancarlo, some last thoughts around scaling up, last minute?
Yeah, absolutely. For example, on this topic, we think that the technology could also be very supportive for all the market around the world. For example, we are looking to launch by year-end a new strategy that will invest in sustainable food producer. So why? Because we know that we need to optimize the growth of we know that crops needs to be strong enough to adapt to every soil condition. So we will invest in companies which will be focused on biotechnology that can be leveraged to optimize farm technique, including soil management and genetic engineering of the new crops, biostimulants and biofertilizers, so that can help the microbial content in soil to promote plant growth. Agriculture equipment, for example, such as micro irrigation solution that can help save water usage while improving crop yield. And finally, also precision agriculture, which means allowing to manage a field in a bespoke manner, so not in a single block of land, but rather dividing individual blocks using sensor-based or map-based variable rate technology. So technology could be a very helpful tool to improve farming also in the low-income countries.
Thank you so very much to my esteemed panelists. I really appreciate your robust intervention and your inspiring messages and the urgency of the work that we need to do. Michael, Giancarlo, Malala, and Loveland, thank you very much. You may leave the stage. I want to say that this is the panel to emulate. They stuck to time and they answered the questions that were asked. So here's a challenge to the next segment. I'm going to be asking country representatives to make their interventions, And again, you have just 2 minutes to make your intervention, and I will be interrupting you. I don't want to do that. I want you to do exactly what the previous panel did. So we're going to start with Albania, representative from Albania. If you can switch on your mic and make your contribution. I'm not sure where Albania is seated, but you have the floor. And the translation is available if anybody needs it.
Thank you.
Proceed, please.
Thank you very much. Regardless progress, the development and sustainability of agriculture require addressing some fundamentally relevant issues such as farm structure, land titles, land consolidation, land development, formalization, improvement, infrastructure such as irrigation, drainage system, roads, as well as challenges resulting from latest crises such COVID pandemic and conflict in Ukraine and climate change impact. In that context, in our case, we increase support for the farmers, and the Albanian government launches the subsidy program to support production of some commodities that normally do not show a competitive advantage, such as cereals. Also, EPARD program supported by EU contributed a lot to agriculture production, agro-industry and rural development. Through the SFS platform, we focused on building the connection needed to generate innovative ideas and achieve food system transformation through multi-stakeholder dialogues and advocating for regional cooperation, linking farmers with local authorities, agrotourism business, civil society and consumers. We also are trying to adopt agroecological farming approaches and to help smallholders reach new market through the training and promoting cooperation and agrotourism unit and urban markets.
Thank you very much, Albania. May I now move to Brazil, and if I can ask the Excellencies to please speak a little louder so that we can all hear you into the microphone. Brazil next, please. All right, we'll move on then if Brazil is still getting ready. Let's go to Botswana. Do we have our delegate from Botswana to make an intervention? Botswana? All right. The two Bs, not in the room yet, we'll return to them as soon as they make their presence known. Chad, do we have an intervention from Chad?
Honorable assistance, je vous salue tous au nom de mon pays, le Tchad. C'est pour nous un immense plaisir, un réel honneur de participer à ce grand événement qui est le sommet des Nations Unies sur le système alimentaire +2 bilan. Aussi voudrais-je exprimer notre gratitude à son Excellence, Monsieur le Secrétaire général des Nations Unies, pour l'invitation adressée à notre pays. Sachant que, malgré les innombrables et importantes potentialités dont regorge mon pays, le Tchad, les performances des activités agro-silvo-pastorales et halieutiques sont faibles et les résultats sont largement en deçà des attentes des acteurs intervenant dans le domaine, notamment les populations rurales. La pression démographique accroît les besoins alimentaires et contribue à la dégradation des ressources naturelles. Quant aux défis directs du changement climatique, les inondations de l'année dernière jamais égalées ont englouti plus de 400 000 hectares de production, la destruction des biens, le déplacement des populations, le dysfonctionnement des marchés et a même limité la mobilité des populations et des acteurs du développement dans les zones concernées. À cela, le flux des réfugiés évalué à plus de 750 000 suite aux différents conflits dans les pays limitrophes, d'où l'impact négatif sur les moyens de production. Si l'on veut vraiment améliorer l'offre alimentaire et créer des revenus et des emplois sécurisés, durables pour les populations, donner espoir aux jeunes, aux femmes et aux groupes vulnérables en particulier, c'est dans l'économie agricole et alimentaire qu'il faut investir. Les enjeux alimentaires, nutritionnels et de résilience sont partie intégrante des réponses aux défis de paix et de stabilité. Par conséquent, nous devrons tous nous mobiliser en faveur de la promotion d'une gestion concertée, pacifiée et durable des ressources agro-silvo-pastorales et halieutiques en impliquant l'ensemble des usagers dans le territoire ciblé, le soutien d'un processus de développement économique fondé sur le renforcement des systèmes d'exploitation familiaux, la contribution des filières porteuses et la participation accrue des femmes et des jeunes, et enfin la promotion de bonnes pratiques autour de l'agroécologie par la mise à disposition d'outils et l'animation d'une concertation internationale. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Thank you very much to Chad. We'll now call Cuba. Cuba.
Muchas gracias a los panelistas que me antecedieron. Muy interesante las experiencias que hemos escuchado en esta mañana. Excelencias, delegados. Cuba avanza en la aplicación del Plan Nacional de Soberanía Alimentaria y Educación Nutricional, enfocado a disminuir la dependencia de las importaciones, potenciar la capacidad productiva, el uso de la ciencia, la tecnología y la innovación y desarrollar sistemas alimentarios locales eficientes, sostenibles en todo el país. La política para impulsar el desarrollo territorial de los sistemas alimentarios y el Plan de Soberanía Alimentaria y Educación Nutricional de Cuba está orientado al desarrollo de la economía y pone especial énfasis en las perspectivas locales, sobre todo para el trabajo de la base y fundamentalmente las comunidades y los municipios. Hemos apostado en incrementar la capacitación de todos los actores que intervienen en dicho proceso productivo, los productores, comercializadores, reguladores, suministradores, educadores, investigadores, consumidores y comunicadores, bajo la conducción de los gobiernos locales con énfasis en la participación ciudadana, particularmente con la juventud y con igualdad de género. Es necesario para lograr el éxito de la transformación de los sistemas alimentarios afrontar los retos y amenazas globales. El mayor obstáculo que enfrenta Cuba para alcanzar los objetivos del desarrollo sostenible es la política hostil impuesta por el bloqueo de los Estados Unidos contra nuestro país y su impacto en la agricultura y la alimentación. El bloqueo obstaculiza el acceso a mercados y tecnologías y equipos agrícolas. Excelencias. A nivel global se requiere del incremento de los recursos adicionales provenientes de la ayuda oficial al desarrollo para que los países puedan asumir los compromisos de alcanzar sistemas alimentarios sostenibles para todos y en particular eliminar el hambre y la pobreza. Cuba reitera su compromiso con la implementación de la Agenda 2030 para el desarrollo sostenible. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Honorable Your Excellency from Cuba. We now go to Kenya. Let's hear from Kenya next. Kenya. Yes, going, gone. Okay. Let's move to Luxembourg. Do we have a representative from Luxembourg?
Good morning to everyone, and thank you for organizing this very interesting panel. I will take my time to talk about a few of the initiatives that Luxembourg is taking to mobilize means for implementing better food systems transformation. First one is the School Meals Coalition, which through its holistic approach has proven to be an important step to kickstart food systems transformation. School meals go far beyond the plate and can promote indigenous foods, help shorten food chains, and minimize food waste. And we are therefore proud to be a member of the coalition and to support its project exploring school feeding in fragile contexts. Second, as a financial center, Luxembourg also works on innovative solutions to mobilize the necessary financial means to transform food systems. Investment funds like the Agribusiness Capital Fund set up by Luxembourg in partnership with IFAD, the European Commission and the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa are an innovative tool to invest directly in agriculture and sustainable practices. Another tool we have developed is the Smallholder Safety Nets Upscaling Program, which we launched in partnership with Switzerland and private investment funds, aspiring to provide technical assistance to smallholder farmers. Fourth, in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Senegal, three of our partner countries for development cooperation, we work together with FAO to ensure food safety and to put in place effective food safety and quality control systems in order to safeguard the health and well-being of people. These are a few initiatives, and I look forward to continuing this important discussion at the SDG Summit in New York in September. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Luxembourg. We've got two more interventions. We're going to start with Palestine also, and then followed by Sri Lanka. If Sri Lanka can get ready as Palestine speaks. Over to you.
Good morning. في البداية بحب أشكركم على هذه القمة المهمة واللي أجت لمناقشة قضايا النظم الغذائية. وبالتأكيد فلسطين من أكثر الدول التي تعاني من انعدام الأمن الغذائي، حيث أن أكثر من ثلث السكان يعاني من انعدام الأمن الغذائي. وانطلاقاً من هذه القناعة قدمت دولة فلسطين تقريرها الطوعي لمنظمة الأغذية والزراعة الأمم المتحدة المتضمن الجهود التي بذلتها والخطوات التي قدمتها في سبيل تحويل النظم الغذائية في فلسطين وتركيزنا المستمر على المشاريع المستدامة في جميع القطاعات، خاصة المشاريع الزراعية، كونها من أهم القطاعات الاقتصادية في فلسطين، حيث كان يمثل النشاط الزراعي الركيزة الأمتن التي ترفض الاقتصاد الفلسطيني بأهم موارد الناتج الإجمالي المحلي، والتي تدنت نسبته إلى أن تصل في 2022 إلى 6%، علما بأنه كان يزيد عن 30% قبل 20 عاما. ولطالما الفلسطينيين أولوا اهتماما خاصا للمشاريع المستدامة لما لها من أثر إيجابي على عدة جوانب حياتية للشعب الفلسطيني، وبالرغم من المخاطر المرتفعة لاستمرارية هذه المشاريع والأسباب لا تخفى على أحد، فممارسات الاحتلال والمستوطنين من اقتلاع أشجار وحرقها وحرق الأراضي الزراعية ومصادرة الأراضي والسيطرة على مصادر المياه، وكذلك جدار الفصل العنصري ومنع استيراد الأدوية والأسمدة، كل هذه أعاقت من تطوير هذا القطاع. مع ذلك فإننا نعمل بجد لتطوير مشاريع مستدامة تهدف لتعزيز الأمن الغذائي في فلسطين، معظمين الاستفادة من كل الموارد. فنحن نعمل على تعزيز الزراعة المستدامة وحماية التنوع البيولوجي وتطوير التكنولوجيا الزراعية المبتكرة. كما نعمل على تعزيز قدرات المزارعين وتحسين الوصول إلى الأراضي والموارد المائية. وبالتأكيد في النهاية بشكر برنامج الفاو، بشكر جميع المشاركين في هذه القمة. شكرا.
Thank you. Thank you, Palestine. We have Sri Lanka next, and then Turkey is our final intervention. Sri Lanka and then Turkey. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka. Going. Gone? Okay. Turkey.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Moderator. As Turkey is our firm belief that the sustainability of food systems should be handled in a holistic way and in a cooperative manner. Without the transformation of smallholder farms in the profitable business, it will not be possible to increase the production. That's why we consider that the digitalization of agriculture has a great potential to change the smallholder farming. We are at the stage where the agriculture production chain is shifting by technology and innovations. Digital agriculture solutions will provide smallholder farmers many advantages, such as receiving farming advisor from their mobile phones, easy to access, to support programs, selling products online. Now all these are available in our country. During the pandemic, we have initiated an online interactive portal called Agriculture and Forestry Academy, in which agriculture training and broadcasting activities that will support farmers with up-to-date information, elaborative training videos in numerous topics were present. We encourage the generational renewal in rural areas and agricultural-related employment, as youth is crucial for the rural digitalization. Therefore, we started the Export Hand in Rural Development project in order to improve productivity and quality in production. We support university graduates in fields of agriculture, animal husbandry, and food, committed to living in the village. We consider the R&D studies and innovation in agriculture are key elements for the transformation of sustainable food system. In order to encourage the use of climate-friendly approach, we have initiated the Climate Smart and Competitive Agriculture Growth Project with the support of the World Bank in 2022. Last but not least, besides all support program, we have an agriculture insurance pool, projects producers against climate change and natural disaster. This program guarantees the risk of loss of yield that may rise due to natural disaster with subsidy support, thus enabling farmers to continue their agriculture production with confidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. May I just ask you, if you have not been able to make an intervention, you can still do so. There are instructions for you on how you can post a written statement, and details are on the screen. Are they? Yes? No? I'll tell you about them in a moment, but you can make a written submission if you so wish. We have come to the end of this first segment of today's proceedings. We now know that it is not an easy task to bring financial flows from governments, development agencies, public banks, private entity, and food industries. But I repeat a message that has been articulated throughout our gathering, that we need to act. The cost of inaction is higher than the cost of action, and that is how we conclude at this moment. We have a second part to our proceedings that will begin at 11, so I must ask you to return promptly before 11 o'clock as we talk about implementation. The Food Systems Summit identified 5 key enablers for food systems transformation: finance, science and innovation, data, trade, and governance. We'll speak in detail about these and also get the key messages that emerged from some of our deliberations. So I'll see you back here at 11 o'clock. Thank you very much. Michelle, you'll tell me when to go, right? Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If we can get started with our second part of our plenary session, Mobilizing Means of Implementation for Food Systems Transformation. If I could just ask everybody to be seated so we can get started, please, and invite our speakers. Just a few more seconds for everybody to find their seat so we could get on with this very important conversation. I mentioned then, when we concluded the last part, that the Food Systems Summit identified 5 key enablers for food systems transformation: finance, science and innovation, data, trade, and governance. During the UNFSS+2, participants went into in-depth discussion on the means of implementation for food systems transformation. And there was a specific focus on the challenges and the progress that has been made. So in this particular segment, we want to bring it all together to get the key messages that came out from each independent session. So the key messages that came out from each independent session on the means of implementation. That's our focus this morning. To get us started, I'd like to invite Juan Lucas Restrepo, joined by Dr. Shakantula Tilsted, to start off the key messages coming out on the means of implementation, progress, challenges, and interlinkages.
Good morning to all excellencies and colleagues. We're all privileged here to be witnessing the progress being made by many countries around the world in terms of their commitments and implementations around food system transformation. We've heard of many of the solutions needed to drive the transformations of our food systems. The means of implementation are a vital ingredient needed to drive it. Individually, they create the capacity in the systems for different types of solutions to work. But we in science know that there are always trade-offs that need to be addressed to optimize the best mix of solutions that work better in different places for different populations, local and cultural contexts. Investments in science and innovation, as we've been hearing, are essential to understanding how to further move food system transformation forward. And for these innovations to matter, we must include all food systems partners in meaningful ways, so approaches are as transdisciplinary as possible. This knowledge should be embedded into support strategies, policies, and programs devised by countries. We also know that taking them forward, food systems transformation needs to be integrated into trade, climate, biodiversity agendas where parties negotiate commitments and financial support together. Only this way can we break down the silos for integrated systems change. Allow me now to give you a flavor of some of the key takeaways, messages coming from the different means of implementation sessions, so we stimulate today's discussion. In digitalization, despite new challenges, digitalization is more critical than ever for accelerating implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Digitalization plays a pivotal role in supporting implementation of national pathways for agri-food systems transformation. Digital tools can empower farmers and food producers with precision agriculture techniques, supply chain optimization, and market access, boosting productivity and sustainability, overall flipping the traditional paradigm. Partners are called to unite in joint digital initiatives for this purpose, such as through the Global Coalition for Data and Digital Food Systems and on other enabling mechanisms, highlighting the need for a coherent multi-stakeholder approach and in support of evidence-based decision-making enabled by technology and data for resilient agri-food systems. Paving the way forward, the SDG Summit and the Summit of the Future, the key role of digital cooperation should be further emphasized and promoted as a means to effectively address the challenges of our world. In terms of data and monitoring systems, agri-food systems transformation needs a scientific-based monitoring systems grounded in a set of clear indicators to guide decision makers in the design, monitoring, and evaluation of public policy and investment. These are critical data gaps. There are critical data gaps that need to be filled soon if we want to strengthen our monitoring capacity and guide policy making and actions. The Food Systems Countdown to 2030 Initiatives Framework and its 50 indicators was highlighted during the session. This initiative offers a feasible starting point for monitoring systems relying on existing data at global level, as it is aligned with the priorities that countries have identified through the national food systems transformation pathways. The event called on the data community to redouble efforts in this direction. In terms of trade, international trade should form an integral part of national and global agri-food systems, as it enables the balancing of global food deficits and surpluses and contributes to satisfying main dimensions of food security, thereby contributing to SDG 2 on zero hunger. The recent shocks on markets, the extreme weather events, the global pandemic, economic downturns, and the war in Ukraine, together with volatility in energy markets, have posed serious challenges for the sustainability of global agri-food systems and highlighted the importance of keeping trade open and predictable. The impacts of shocks have been uneven, generally hitting vulnerable countries harder than others. Food trade can increase the diversity of food supplied in a country at levels above what domestic production could sustain, thus providing the basis for better nutrition. However, high poverty levels made worse by the spikes in food and fertilizer prices and the depreciation of country currencies continue to present a challenge for developing countries to meet SDG 2. International cooperation as well as collaboration among all the stakeholders at national level are necessary conditions for the successful contribution of international trade to food security and sustainable development. In terms of governance, it plays a critical role in ensuring that institutions, legal frameworks, and collective action at all levels lead to the desired transformation of agri-food systems. Countries are setting up governance arrangements for the inclusion of all relevant stakeholders, including governments, parliaments, civil society, business, youth, media, academia, indigenous peoples, and local communities in decision-making processes. Participation in decision-making is key to ensure ownership by all relevant actors and inclusive implementation of agri-food systems transformation pathways across sectors and territories. Parliaments have an important role to play in supporting agri-food systems transformation by ensuring that the required legislation, accountability, and budgeting are in place. Innovative evidence is still required to help build a shared understanding on what it means in practice, addressing possible trade-offs and maximizing synergies and allowing engagement of actors. Decentralized implementation, including budget allocation, is key to tailor results to socio-economic and cultural context, as well as generating results at scale. Then, in terms of the financing agenda, and we heard a lot of this this morning and through the week, the cost of food systems transformation is a global challenge of us all, both North and South. The cost of inaction exceeds that of action. Without financing for food systems transformation, the SDGs and climate goals will be out of reach. Financing for food systems transformation must be central to the SDG financing strategy and of the climate finance agenda. While striving to finance emergency responses, all actors must step up transformative investments that restore human dignity and give the most vulnerable a way out of emergency assistance. Low-income countries are engaging in bold domestic resource mobilization, but funding is insufficient to meet the growing cost of food systems transformation. They must be complemented by substantial increases in affordable long-term financing, including substantial rises in ODA, increased capital bases of development banks and funds providing concessional financing, incentivizing transformative private investment through blended finance. We heard about this morning, and new financial pact bringing new liquidity in the system. Governments and development partners must step up public incentives and frameworks to incentivize private investments at the scale and scope needed. In doing so, let us remember that increasing private sector investment does not automatically improve food system performance. Governments and the global community must build on voluntary commitments from some food business to standards and norms and accountability frameworks for the food industry. Business models must work for small producers and agri-food system operators. Finally, we can't wait until 2030 to know if investments are to the point and impactful. High standards in financial analysis and timelines are vital. IFAD and the World Bank must ensure their new food systems financial tool, which presents decision makers with clear and simple information on country and global trends in financial flows to food systems, is available without delay. I'll have Shakuntala Tilsted from CGIAR complement on science and innovation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Juan Lucas. The Leadership Dialogue, Science, Technology, and Innovation Roundtable with the Scientific Advisory Committee was held yesterday afternoon, and we had quite a large participation in the audience. I have summarized 3 key messages which I want to give to you. 1, science, technology, and innovation are powerful accelerators of agri-food systems transformation, consolidating multidisciplinary sciences to integrated, coherent, and actionable national pathways from multiple actors, from policymakers to farmers and youth, leaving no one behind. 2, science, technology, and innovation approaches must bridge nature-positive solutions, traditional and indigenous knowledge with modern innovation, such as data, bioinformatics, genomics, and AI, in responding to the democratization of science for all. And 3, Science, technology, and innovation approaches must build on and strengthen past and existing efforts while embracing interventions for food systems transformation, which are inclusive, equitable, and just. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Juan Lucas Restrepo and Dr. Shakuntula Tilsted. We're going to hear more from you in our panel discussion, so I will be reintroducing you in just a moment. And that is exactly what we're going to be doing at this moment, following the rundown on the deliberations, the key messaging. We're going to get reaction. We have agreed that it is often challenging, or always challenging, for low and middle income countries to mobilize the means of implementation for food systems transformation. The access to the technology that we are hearing about, science and data, is sometimes very difficult for them, therefore frustrating their efforts in this regard. So let's see how we move with urgency, how we create inclusion in this space. I would like to welcome Maximo Torero, Chief Economist at FAO. If you can come forward, please. Chief of Economist at FAO. Agnes Kalibata, President of AGRA. Joe Puri, IFAD, Associate Vice President, Strategy and Knowledge. Martien van Nieuwkoop, Global Director, World Bank Agriculture and Food Global Practice. Ertarin Kazan, CEO and founder, Food Systems for the Future. And of course, again, Dr. Shakuntula Tilsted, Director, Nutrition, Health and Food Security Impact Area Platform, CGIAR. Thank you. Okay, let's start with reaction. I always like to hear reaction just to find out how you make sense of the presentation and the information that was shared with us. Maximo, I'll start with you, your headline reaction from the statements and the summary of the outcomes. How much time do you have? You have 2 minutes.
My reaction could be very long.
You have 2 minutes each and a half.
Okay, so thank you so much, and thank you very much to Juan Lucas for the summary. I think that since we start the process of the Food System Summit with Agnes being the person leading the summit 2 years ago, just bringing the concept of systems is extremely complicated. It's a very complex concept that brings us also the medium and long-term approach to the agri-food system, because it's looking at the trade-offs and it's looking at how other sectors can be impacted by the actions we do in agriculture and how other sectors impact agriculture. This is related to health, environment, and all the different areas that we are looking at. I think the sessions, at least that we have been working intensively, are bringing elements to that puzzle. It's a complex puzzle that we need to build up to be able to come up to some solutions and some actions, because at the end of the line, what we want is actions at the country level, and we want that to happen. Digitalization will facilitate the process. Data will be crucial to understand and to see where the problems are, and that's the whole repurposing agenda that we are working with our colleagues here, the World Bank and others, on how we can improve the way resources to agriculture from the public sector can be improved. But it also is important to understand how important trade is today. It could be 10 years from now, the story will be different, but today we need trade, and that's a conclusion. That's a very clear situation. If we look at the data, there is no way that we can get access to healthy diets if we don't allow food to move from one location to the other. But there is also no way in which we cannot allocate our natural resources in the most efficient way if we don't have trade. So we need to be very careful, and we need to understand that that is important to facilitate and to create. And what we have been seeing in the Black Sea Grain initiatives and in all the problems that we could be facing in the future for export restrictions and things that avoid the mobility of food, and not only for emergencies, but for all the activities that we need to have, trade will be central, and we need to work on that. But governance will also be important, because this will require an institutional reform, and that will take time. That's not something that countries can implement over the night. but we need to find ways in which we can provide technical support to the countries to achieve that. And it's very important, and my colleagues will talk about financing, it's very important to look at the financing side, and I won't elaborate on that. But just to summarize in these 1.97 seconds, it's very important that we look at the end picture that we want to achieve. What is the picture that these pieces will build up, and how we can create actions to achieve that and work with the countries, because this has to be driven by the countries from the north, from the south, to build that puzzle so that we can have this picture of the transformation that we're looking, so that we can achieve the goals that we want. Thank you.
You did excellently, because now you started on the call to action, which would have been my second question to you, but I'm still going to give you an opportunity in the next round. Agnes Kalibata, again, your impressions and reactions.
Is this working?
Yes, it is.
Very good. No, thank you. I just want to step back to 2019 and remember that when we started this Food System Summit, it was about a decade to go, a decade to 2030. So the reason we are here today, and the reason we'll be here every 2 years, is to check on the progress that we are making. So it was, when I look at the means of implementation, then that we called out that are very critical to how we get there. There are 3 things that stand out for me. They're the must-have. I look at digitization as a must-have. Science and innovation as a must-have. That's the infrastructure that we need to be able to move things forward. And they are then, actually I wanted to call that the must-be. So these things must be in place. The must-have are the things that Maximo was saying: data, trade, finance. And then the must-do, the governance. I mean, how many times did we hear people here talk about some of the things they would like to see in place, but also then the things we know we can influence, how we come together as countries to influence trade, how we come together as countries to influence food systems, how we come together as sectors to get things moving. Now, what I had here today was very encouraging in the sense that, listening to what was presented earlier by IFAD and the World Bank, we do have tools that are coming up. This Talk Tech moment becomes the moment where we can talk about the tools we've put forward. What stood out for me is that if this is going to be day zero, we are not doing well from a financing global change perspective. What I'm interested to see is what's going to happen 2 years from today. If what the data we're presented with today as the day zero, where will we be? And these are things. But then I also wanted to talk about some of the other tools, the countdown tool that was presented by Lawrence and others. Again, today for me marks the day where we've been working so hard to put some of the thinking behind how we need to track change and progress. You had the World Benchmarking Alliance and what they are trying to do here. So the opportunity for us is going to be in what we do in the next 2, in the next 4, in the next 6, all the way to 2030. So I'm very excited because I do feel that we've put so much effort in 2 things, in bringing the tools out, but let's also understand the nature of the collaboration and partnerships that is needed. All these conversations brought out the fact that we need to work together. Private capital can't work alone. Public sector can't work alone. So let's start building that ecosystem that then becomes the reason we come to the Stock Tech. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Joe?
Thank you very much, Rabi. So let me start with 2 partly quiz questions. What, in the audience's expectation, is the least cost intervention or the most effective intervention that we have to increase the income of the poorest of the poor? That's my first question. The second question is, what do you think is the most effective intervention that we can put in to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in rural agriculture? So these are not trick questions, because the answer to the first, actually, we do have it. There's compelling evidence now that says that, yes, if we use a graduation approach, which is a package of 6 to 7 interventions, which includes livelihood support, cash support, training, skilling, cash transfers, etc., we can make a difference to the poorest of the poor. But the answer to the second question, we don't have it. We don't know what the evidence is. What is the most compelling evidence for us to go forward and to intervene so that we can reduce emissions from rural systems, from agricultural systems? Because the evidence is very poor. So it brings me to my first reaction with respect to what's coming out of the dialogues that Rebi very nicely and Juan very nicely summarized as well. I think what we need to have a dialogue on is, very importantly, what are the incentives in the system? And it brings us to financing. Because unless we have incentives for the private sector to come in to take on the kind of risk, the kind of lagged returns that we are going to see if they have to invest in agriculture, in rural agriculture, in climate, this is not going to happen. If we don't have incentives for multilateral organizations to come forward and to take on risks that is, say, BBB rated or even lower, we are not going to see the transformation in the finance agenda that we know that the Bridgetown folks are asking for. So we are going to continue to see Africa having to pay 3 to 10% higher on their loans because of that asymmetry of information. And I think that's where we need to point the dialogue to, and that's where we need to pivot our own conversations on. One, on the incentives in the system, and the second, and I hope we get to talk about this a little bit later, the accountability of the system. Thanks, Rebi.
Thank you very much. And Martin?
Very good, thank you very much. You know, I think there's, in the statement, I think there are a lot of elements that are very relevant for the implementation pathways. At the same time, the conclusion is, and what you hear, is that the implementation pathways actually are unique for the countries. Every country needs to find out their own implementation pathways. So I think that could be confusing. You know, you have so many elements, and at the same time the recognition that the implementation pathways are country specific. So my point is, how can we actually bring some structure into that and provide some guidance, I mean, to countries and governments to prepare and make their implementation pathways more specific? I mean, what kind of framework can we think of? I want to propose, put forward, I mean, of a 4-dimensional framework here. And I think it contains many of the elements that many panels have been discussing actually over the last few days. I think the first is incentives. I think any pathway needs to be informed about to align incentives towards a green, resilient, inclusive food system, and to what extent existing public support can be put behind it. I mean, Maximo was also mentioning about that. The second, of course, everybody talking about innovation. Clearly, you know, the pathways need to seek how we can accelerate innovation. Right now, countries are underinvesting in innovation, so how can we scale that up? The benchmark here is, you know, 1% of agriculture GDP. The third dimension, common dimension, I think, across the pathways is scaling investments for the private sector. In the session that I participated yesterday, we put forward the idea that in each pathway, countries should consider putting in place a compact between the public and the private sector that actually de-risks, I mean, private sector investments in green, resilient, inclusive value chain. And in return, I mean, the companies benefiting from that should actually raise their ESG standards. The food sector is really lagging behind other sectors when it comes to following and putting in place ESG standards. And the fourth element, of course, is institutions. Food systems go beyond the Ministry of Agriculture. So actually, how can governments put in place effective mechanism to coordinate an engagement of food systems across the various ministries? And I think the tool that was presented on Monday that IFAD and the World Bank worked on, the financing flow for food systems tool, actually could be a very useful tool for the government actually to get a concrete handle on that. So incentives, innovation, investments, and institutions as the framework, I mean, to kind of specify the country-specific implementation pathways. And maybe that will be a way to organize many of the very good ideas that we've heard over the last 2.5 days.
I might as well ask you then the second question, because you have touched on that theme. You're talking about unique circumstances for each country. So it sounds as if you're suggesting a level of autonomy and flexibility, yet we do need an interconnected approach to means of implementation?
Yes, of course, and because then also you can then link, I mean, global programs, I mean, across those various dimensions of the implementation pathways. No, I mean, countries cannot do it alone. I mean, that was also very clear. I mean, donor support is needed. Donors have different kind of interests, different priorities. There's a huge fragmentation right now if you look at the ODA for agriculture. So having this kind of structured approach to the implementation pathways with kind of 4 clear entry points, I mean, that can also then tailor donor support and then avoid the fragmentation, because, you know, there's actually a disconnect, of course. We're talking about food systems, which is a very comprehensive approach, while at the same time, a lot of the support that's provided to food systems is very fragmented and actually very, very small. So how can we actually also make that more integrated and comprehensive would be very much in line with the food systems approach.
Etharine, we'd like to hear from you now. We're talking means of implementation, your immediate response then to the outcomes that we've just learned about.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to avoid using my time repeating what has already been said by my brilliant fellow panelists. And just to ask us to take a step back and realize that we have a plan for 2030. The global community has embraced a way forward. But what we are financing today, what we are prioritizing today, will not deliver that future that we want. That's the reality. And we've heard that in every session. The concerns about financing in particular, when we talk about, and we saw the ODA flows, the majority of money is going to humanitarian response. That is not going to change. Full stop. But the reality is the humanitarian crisis will accelerate and increase because our agricultural development activity has not caught up with the realities of climate's effect on agriculture. And so we're in this very precarious situation of, yes, everything that has been said is true, but the challenges that we have on the ground, that governments, that communities, that private sector are dealing with day to day, have little relationship to the policy frameworks that we are building at the global level. Primarily because our ag systems are private sector enterprises, from the farm to the consumer. And so yes, we must, don't get me wrong, of course we need to have the appropriate policies. Of course we need to have adequate ecosystems to support private sector development. But we need to recognize that if we want the private sector to come into places where private sector capital is not flowing today, it will require that we build commercially viable enterprises with capital stacks that are supported by much of the concessionary capital and other tools that we've been talking about, innovative capital that we've been talking about. But it will be based upon the ability for that capital to deliver commercial returns. And it may sound too technical to private sector, but there is not enough ODA, there is not enough public capital to achieve the the sustainable transformation of the food system, from the farm to the consumer, that is required to build the resilience that is necessary to support a system that is strained and will continuously be strained by climate change, unless we are able to build those commercially viable deals on the ground. So the point that I'm making, and I'll say this in closing because this is important, is that what happens in these rooms is critical, but what happens on the ground is even more important. And our ability to bring those two together to ensure that we are providing the support that countries need, that businesses need at country level to move forward. We need to put as much effort into that as we do into the conversations that we engage in these summits.
Thank you so very much. Let's move to Dr. Shakuntala. I mean, you made the presentation, you were part of the presentation, so asking you for your reaction to the outcomes. Also, just a conversation around what happens next now. We've identified the means of implementation. What happens next?
Thank you so much. And I want to start on a very positive note. I'd really like to applaud all who, when we started even before the UN Food System Summit in 2021, and started with the dialogues at national level, at regional and global level, there was so much effort and energy that went into those dialogues. And after the dialogues, from then to now, and now with the development and implementation of the national pathways. So I do think we are in good stead to move forward. I know there's a lot to do, and I do know that it's short time from now on to 2030, but we must applaud the efforts that have been made by so many. And if I would consider the points that I have raised with respect to science and innovations, and the role of the Scientific Advisory Committee, I do see our primary efforts should go into supporting the national pathways and the plans of countries, not just in countries at the government level, but all actors within the agri-food systems, from the policy makers all the way to the small-scale farmers. Because there needs to be a democratization of the science we have and the use of the science we have in order that it benefits all and leaves no one behind.
Let me just engage you a little bit on that, because this theme of supporting national efforts keeps coming up, whether we're talking about trade, whether we're talking about investment, infrastructure, and a point that was made very strongly by Kenya's vice president yesterday when he was talking specifically about the international financial architecture, saying that it is not often suited or suitable for domestic realities. And again, on trade, we are hearing over and over again that regional and international trade regimes do often frustrate national efforts and thereby affecting food systems nationally. You were talking about this from an innovation and data point of view. How do we align that so that externally, and I use that in inverted commas, there is a conversation and synergy between what we put together at the international level and what is needed domestically?
Well, let me focus, I'll focus on the science.
Yes.
And as people have said in so many other fields, that when we make our efforts and we want to do something that represents the whole and reaches the whole of all the players within agri-food systems, then there has to be a certain level of inclusiveness and making sure that when we design the science, when we implement the science, when we evaluate the science, that that's done across the board, not just with researchers and not just with national, international research institutions, but taking into consideration all the actors within the agri-food systems. And I do think we can do this because we can see that voices, there are more voices, there are more, and the voices are getting a better place at the table, and they are together, not just in different groups, but getting together as a whole. And there's a certain democratization, even in the science, in deciding which science we do and how we implement the science we have.
Mm-hmm. And Agnes, I want to come to you now because I think the whole idea of that question was around the various elements, whether it's innovation, data, technology, trade, all of that just coming together to support domestic efforts. I do want to come to you because you had a list of must-haves, if I'm not mistaken, must-do, and it gives us a forward-looking lens around what do we do first. This is a call to action. What needs to happen when we leave this room?
Thank you. There's a lot that is happening already, as we've said, but of the things that we've been having discussions around means of implementation, I keep asking myself if at country level, because that's where the rubber meets the road, if we have enough action, enough traction, so which takes me to governance as a critical means of implementation that we need to think through. Governance will be critical for trade between nations. Africa is trading at 17%, where Europe is trading between Europe at 77% or so. Maximo knows these numbers better than I. But these are areas that are not working well because we are not engaging each other enough. Our governance systems are not working between country to country. But let's go to the food system. If we are going to move the food system, because it's very complex, you heard how everybody's talking about complexity, we will not move if we don't get sectors to start working together: agriculture, health, energy, environment, trade, and many others, infrastructure. These are sectors that need to work together. So I really think that at national level, countries need to put a lot of effort into dialogue. When I see some of the work that is beginning to take shape at country level, the biggest challenge is dialogue between sectors. How you get sectors to move from their individual silos and individual of doing business to actually understand that this system must be moved together. And like the Deputy Prime Minister of Eswatini said, this is something that is extremely urgent. Acting on food systems is not something that we can do whenever we are working against climate change. So talking and engaging is probably going to be one of the most critical elements of how we go forward. So dialogue between sectors, dialogue between nations, dialogue between food corridors. In Africa, we are beginning to advance this idea of food corridors. If Kenya is a country that needs food, it's part of a corridor. It's part of a corridor that produces so much food in Tanzania and Zimbabwe and Uganda and wherever. You know, but it's also great at certain things. So how do we get these corridors to work for each other? We will not get these things to work until we start investing in governance. But there's one extra element of governance. We do have, in the Food Systems Summit, we do have coalitions that have come forth and sources of huge capacity, technical capacity, and lots of information that can help countries move forward. But again, if we don't coordinate, if we keep our fragmented efforts and come at countries with these fragmented efforts, we'll not be able to advance. So for me, we need to step back and ask ourselves, how do we cooperate, collaborate, and coordinate better to move food systems forward? That's one thing that we must address going forward.
All right, we have run out of time. I know that there's still so much more that we wanted to get through, but we've run out of time and must move swiftly to our next segment. Let me thank you, Maximo, Agnes, Joe, Martin, Etherine, and of course, Dr. Shakuntala. Thank you. You can leave the stage. We're going to have audience engagement now as you clear the stage. Thank you. Thank you very much. And for this session, I would like to invite the co-chairs of the session, AVP Santala from IFAD, Minister for Food Security in Niger, to come on stage and help us with our audience engagement. Thank you. Satu Santala and Ali Betty. I will shift and make room for you as we engage the audience. The microphones should be on. Thank you.
Good morning, dear audience, and happy and proud to be here to facilitate our conversation going forward after such an interesting set of conversations earlier this morning. We will be co-chairing with Honorable Minister, and I will pass now the word to him, and then he will facilitate and call on countries, and kindly be aware that the first two countries to speak will be Chile and Dominican Republic. Over to you, Minister.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, nous allons donner la parole au Chili.
Minister, can I ask you to speak up? I can't hear you.
Bonjour. Nous allons donc passer directement la parole au Chili. Le Chili.
Muchas gracias entonces a todos y todas por permitirnos participar el día de hoy. En primer lugar, creo que es importante destacar la relevancia de este panel, dado que nos permite convertir las palabras en acciones. En segundo lugar, me gustaría también comentar que Chile ha avanzado en generar una estrategia de soberanía para la seguridad alimentaria, que eso implica también el poder reconocer 5 patrimonios de nuestra sociedad, de nuestro país, para la transformación de sistemas alimentarios, y que eso implica el poder reducir las brechas que actualmente existen, implica el poder reconocer los efectos de los determinantes sociales de la salud y proveer de retroalimentación para ver el impacto de nuestra política pública. Me gustaría mencionar también que para ello nosotros vemos que un medio de implementación importante son los datos. Y en ese sentido contamos con el registro social de hogares, un lugar o un registro que implica que cada familia se le hace una calificación socioeconómica y permite entregar los beneficios y los apoyos. Sin embargo, para nosotros es fundamental el poder avanzar en la universalización de estas políticas. En segundo lugar, tenemos una encuesta de caracterización socioeconómica nacional, dentro de las cuales ya se está midiendo la inseguridad alimentaria como un aspecto relevante y parte de la pobreza multidimensional. Y además hemos empezado a fortalecer medidas de protección social, tanto como los programas de alimentación escolar, que facilitan la incorporación y la permanencia también de estos estudiantes en el sistema educacional. También contamos con un observatorio a nivel de Elige Vivir Sano, una secretaría ejecutiva, para poder hacer un seguimiento y monitorizar indicadores de salud y factores y conductas de riesgo asociados a enfermedad. Finalmente, me gustaría hacer una pequeña mención en los últimos segundos respecto a que, más que recaudar más fondos, para Chile es fundamental la redistribución de estos recursos y también poder considerar la inversión considerando el contexto de exposición a distintos shocks ambientales, dada la crisis y la triple crisis mundial. Por lo tanto, nada más que eso, quisiéramos apoyar y mantener el compromiso y convocar a los demás países a avanzar en romper este status quo para que todos y todas puedan gozar de una vida sana, plena y digna. Muchas gracias.
Merci beaucoup au Chili pour votre présentation intéressante autour de votre stratégie de souveraineté alimentaire avec ses différentes composantes et qui ciblent l'amélioration de l'état nutritionnel des Chiliens et améliore la sécurité alimentaire, la souveraineté alimentaire globale du pays. Donc nous allons donner la parole à la République dominicaine.
Sí, buenos días para todas y todos. Estimados colegas de los Estados miembros de la Organización de las Naciones Unidas, esta reunión nos convida para trabajar y garantizar un mejor futuro a nuestro pueblo, con el sistema alimentario más inclusivo, sostenible y resilientes, capaces de generar los impactos en cada individuo para una mejor alimentación, nutrición, con el enfoque de una sola salud, para que los alimentos sean más accesibles y nutritivos para todos. Bajo la misma premisa, quiero citar los 3 pilares del plan de trabajo bianual del sistema: la gente del planeta y la prosperidad de los pueblos, porque nos permite delimitar un marco de acción concreto y práctico, donde todos sean parte del proceso de transformación y donde cada uno construyamos el futuro que queremos. La República Dominicana ha venido avanzando en su estructura normativa y ejecutiva en estos pilares de la soberanía y la seguridad alimentaria a través de su marco normativo bajo la Ley 589-16 y su reglamento de aplicación, teniendo ya un segundo Plan Nacional para la Soberanía y Seguridad Alimentaria para el periodo 2023-2026. En plena conciencia de la importancia de esta iniciativa global para la transformación de los sistemas alimentarios, nuestra hoja de ruta nacional es la brújula que da orientación a las acciones gubernamentales que antes estaban superadas bajo esta nueva dirección a través del órgano nacional para estos asuntos, el Consejo Nacional para la Soberanía y Seguridad Alimentaria. Este nuevo plan gira en torno a la gobernanza, la disponibilidad de los alimentos y el acceso a la alimentación y la nutrición y a la gestión de riesgos en el cambio climático, tomando apoyo del plan de trabajo bianual, el Plan SAN. Hemos delineado las siguientes acciones. En primer lugar, lanzamos la ruta estratégica y la nueva guías alimentaria GASAS con el propósito de transformar el sistema de alimentación y nutrición y aumentar la calidad de vida de nuestros nacionales. En segundo lugar, reforzamos la investigación en materia de salud para determinar el estado nuestros ciudadanos a través de estudios focalizados para identificar casualidades y redireccionar la política de producción, comercialización, alimentación o consumo de los alimentos. En cuanto a la población estudiantil, estos estudios replantean el enfoque para fortalecer con campañas para fomentar una mayor conciencia de la carga nutritiva que requiere un individuo a temprana edad. En tercer lugar, estamos desarrollando el programa para la fortificación nutritiva del arroz, principal alimento de la canasta básica de nuestro pueblo, con el objetivo de que este sea un medio que aporte más micronutrientes necesarios para la salud. En cuanto a las acciones sobre el clima, se han articulado acciones públicas privadas para restaurar las cuencas de ríos claves y restaurar los ecosistemas con el segundo propósito de crear las condiciones para una producción agrícola más sostenible. Además, mayor inversión pública en la infraestructura hídrica nacional, sobre todo en los afluentes claves en las zonas altas para aprovechar la generación limpia de energía de fuente hídrica y restauración de ecosistema. A la vez, esto crea un multipropósito al impactar favorablemente en el empleo, la inclusividad con la mujer y los jóvenes, aumentando del ingreso de las personas para que puedan acceder a dietas más saludables. El gobierno dominicano recientemente lanzó una iniciativa sobre compras gubernamentales verdes con el objetivo de fomentar y acelerar al uso eficiente de los recursos y a la adquisición de bienes y servicios con el menor impacto ambiental posible. En cuanto a los aspectos de acceso y distribución de los alimentos, se inició en este mes de abril del año en curso el programa Comer del Campo al Colmado. Este programa tiene como propósito abaratar los costos de adquisición de los alimentos básicos a los más vulnerables, dinamizar y fortalecer las microempresas, fomentando el esquema cooperativista para que puedan ser más competitivos y crear las condiciones para que los ciudadanos consuman productos frescos con bajo procesamiento y mayor calidad. Destacamos esta política pública sobre acceso a los alimentos bajo costo como el programa de comedores económicos, donde el consumidor adquiere alimento cocido a bajo costo. En segundo lugar, están los mercados de productores regionales y bodegas móviles, donde se adquieren productos frescos a bajo costo. Estos puntos están en toda la geografía nacional, con 6.207 mercados y 12.937 bodegas móviles. Finalmente, ciertamente tenemos muchos desafíos por delante para acelerar la transformación y poder llegar a cumplir a los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible para el 2030, reducir el hambre y la desnutrición a tasa cero. En segundo lugar, mitigar los riesgos del clima, las pandemias y la inseguridad alimentaria, fortaleciendo la agricultura familiar y los grupos vulnerables. Es por esto que estos pilares son clave para la República Dominicana en su política de transformación. Agradecemos al sistema de las Naciones Unidas por coordinar este momento de balance y al comité organizador por tan plácida estadía en esta hermosa ciudad. Muchas gracias.
Merci beaucoup à la République dominicaine. Merci beaucoup pour votre présentation. Je vais passer la parole à la Namibie, mais je vais profiter pour dire que le temps nous est compté, le temps est contre nous, donc d'être moins consommateur de temps, si vous permettez. La Namibie, vous avez la parole.
Good morning, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to share information regarding food systems transformation in Namibia. Namibia launched a revised and multi-sectoral food and nutrition security policy, including a coordination structure on national and subnational levels and implementation action plan. The policy aims to provide integrated, affordable, accessible, and equitable quality food and nutrition security services that are responsive to the needs of the population. Several food systems related interventions have been implemented under this policy. The National Food Systems Pathways was incorporated into the ongoing formulation of the National Agricultural Investment Plan. The NAIP is Namibia's medium-term strategy for agriculture, and it aims to transform the agriculture sector to achieve economic prosperity and enhance livelihoods. Namibia has implemented multi-sectoral interventions such as value chain schemes, focusing on poultry, dairy, livestock, horticulture, and crops, integrated food system projects, development of arable land for irrigation, capacity building and awareness creation on promoting consumption of healthy and nutritious diets in food systems context. Developing and integrating the One Health approach in Namibia is work in progress. Research awareness creation and capacity building on value addition, including indigenous food, farming for resilience projects, promoting marketing access through e-commerce platforms, and efforts are underway to ensure sustainable marine and freshwater utilization. In a nutshell, thank you.
Merci beaucoup, la Namibie, pour votre partage. Nous allons donner la parole maintenant aux Lesotho. Les Lesotho, vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. On behalf of Lesotho, I want to put forward that in enhancing the food system transformation, Lesotho, despite having the National Agricultural Implementation Policy, we were also supported by FAO to develop a comprehensive national agricultural policy in 2022. The objective of developing the comprehensive national policy was that every sector should be channeled through this policy to put together all the stakeholders so that we integrate and interchange while we transform our food systems. We already are rolling into school feeding program. We are capacitating and empowering the smallholder farmers through the smallholder the agricultural production project. And last week, we were only contracting 88 young farmers who are smallholders. We have constructed infrastructure by constructing wool sheds, as we are second in wool and mohair production. We have constructed and rehabilitated wool centers, wool sheds. We have constructed the slaughter slabs, while we have been able to tap money from hand in hand, whereby we have we are trying to build the value chains for commodity associations, the commodities of on potatoes, pulses, poultry, and pickery. Despite the abundance of water, clean, very clean water that we have in Lesotho, that can help Lesotho to encourage and invite investors to the blue economy, that can help all of us. We have a lot of fallow land just because of the finances. Thereby, we invite investors to assist us in digitization and data collection, mechanization, and building of infrastructure for aggregation of products from the smallholders. Otherwise, to address and be responsive to the high stunting rate that we have in malnutrition, we have engaged the communities we are developing village nutrition clubs. And most of those clubs are being led by women. Among others, other members are youth. And we think we are in the right path to addressing the challenges. However, we also have an agricultural production productivity project that enhances and capacitate our research institution. Through the projects that we have, we capacitate extension.
Lesotho, could you please come to the end of your remarks? Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, les Lesotho. Nous allons donner donc la parole à Oman. Et nous allons préciser que vous avez maximum 3 minutes.
شكرا. أصحاب المعالي والسعادة رؤساء الوفود المشاركة الحضور الكريم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يطيب لي أن أتحدث إليكم باسم وفد سلطنة عمان في هذا اليوم بمناسبة قمة الأمم المتحدة للنظم الغذائية والتي تتيح الفرصة للدول للمراجعة وتقييم ما تم إنجازه خلال العامين المنصرمين واستعراض سبل النجاح وأولويات التنفيذ لسد الفجوات وإيجاد الحلول المناسبة للتحديات التي تواجه النظم الغذائية. إن المتغيرات العالمية والأزمات الدولية والاقتصادية والصحية أكدت هشاشة النظم الغذائية وأبرزت التحديات التي تواجه واقع ومستقبل النظم الغذائية بالعالم، وأكدت الحاجة العاجلة لتكثيف الجهود لإيجاد الحلول العملية لتلك التحديات على المستوى العالمي والإقليمي والمحلي. وقد اتخذت سلطنة عمان مجموعة من الإجراءات المتمثلة في تنفيذ عدد من المبادرات والتي من أهمها التوسع في المشاريع الاستثمارية الزراعية المبنية على المزارع التخصصية والاستزراع السمكي وتعزيز القيمة المحلية المضافة التي توظف التقانة وتعزز استدامة الموارد الطبيعية بهدف رفع نسبة الاكتفاء الذاتي للسلع المنتجة محلياً، وتطوير مبادرات المشاريع التي تجذب الشباب وتعزيز دور المرأة من خلال تشجيع الرقمنة واستخدام الابتكار التكنولوجي في كافة سلسلة الإنتاج. ومن هذه المبادرات إنشاء المنصات الرقمية المتعلقة بالمنتجات الزراعية والحيوانية والسمكية، والتي أشارت بها منظمة الفاو كأحد التجارب الناجحة لتوفير الغذاء، واتخاذ سياسات مسؤولة نحو تعزيز الحياد الكربوني بحلول عام 2050 من خلال تنفيذ مشاريع مرتبطة بالهيدروجين الأخضر والطاقة النظيفة، ومعالجة تحديات ندرة المياه وفق أولويات التي تعمل على إيصال مياه الشرب لجميع المواطنين عبر شبكات محطات التحلية، المحافظة على المخزون الجوفي من المياه واستغلاله بكفاءة في العمليات الزراعية من خلال استخدام التقنيات الحديثة، تمويل صغار المزارعين والصيادين وتمكين المرأة ودعم المشاريع الصغيرة والمتوسطة المرتبطة بالأمن الغذائي من خلال زيادة المحفظة الإقراضية لبنك التنمية العماني. وهذا يؤكد اهتمام سلطنة عمان بموضوع التمويل ومتوافق مع الحديث اليوم عن أهمية التمويل للنظم الزراعية. أيضا مبادرة خطة الإنتاج القمح للتوسع في زيادة الاستثمارات الموجهة في زراعة القمح ودعم شراء محصول القمح المنتج محليا من قبل المزارعين، ومبادرة الحكومة لإعفاء مجموعة من السلع الغذائية من ضريبة القيمة المضافة. وفي الختام فإن سلطنة عمان تؤكد على الاستمرار في تنفيذ المبادرات التي من شأنها تعزيز النظم الغذائية وتوثيق هذه المبادرات بما يحقق التقدم المحرز في تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة 2030. شاكرين لكم الدعوة الكريمة للمشاركة في هذه القمة، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Merci beaucoup au Sultanat d'Oman. Nous allons donner la parole au Soudan. Le Soudan, vous avez la parole.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحضور الكريم بمختلف مقاماتكم السامية، يشرفني أشارك في هذا المؤتمر الهام والذي يناقش أهم القضايا، وهي قضية الأمن الغذائي والنظم الغذائية. أحب أن أوضح أن اهتمام السودان بمبادرة التحول في النظم الغذائية يتأتى من أن السودان يمتلك قدر كبير من الموارد الطبيعية والبشرية التي تيسر له تحقيق التحول في النظم الغذائية، ولكن هناك بعض المهددات التي تحول دون ذلك، منها التغير المناخي، الأزمات الاقتصادية، ارتفاع الأسعار والنزاعات. بادر السودان في البدء بإعداد تحقيق برامج هذه المبادرة بتكوين إطار مؤسسي متكامل حتى يضع اللبنة الأولى والخطوط العريضة لإعداد استراتيجية متكاملة لتنفيذ الأهداف والموجهات التي جاءت بها المبادرة. وقد تم إعداد الاستراتيجية وجاءت مستوفية لكل البرامج، وهي التحول في النظم الغذائية لتكون نظم مستدامة وقوية وعادلة وقادرة على تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة. ولكن المعضلة الأساسية تتمثل في توفير الموارد المالية لتنفيذ هذه الاستراتيجية. بالرغم من استجابة المنظمات المتحدة والمنظمات العالمية والإقليمية، إلا التنفيذ ظل قاصراً. ومن أهم النتائج التي تحققت في المدى القصير من عمر هذه المبادرة هي تحقيق إنتاجية عالية في الموسم السابق للمحاصيل الزراعية الغذائية، وذلك بتطبيق حزم تقنية عالية بالاستفادة من هيئات البحوث والابتكارات. وأكد أن السودان قادر على أن يترجم هذه الاستراتيجية إلى تدخلات وبرامج تنفيذية بالتعاون مع منظومة المجتمع الدولي. ويمكن لهذه الأنشطة أن تقوم على النحو التالي: ربط الأنشطة العاجلة بالأنشطة متوسطة المدى وطويلة المدى، بناء الصمود للفئات المتأثرة بمحددات الأمن الغذائي، رفع الكفاءات العاملة في المجال الزراعي الرعوي والصناعي والخدمي، الدعم الفني واللوجستي لتنفيذ مخرجات التحول في النظم الغذائية، توفير الحزم التقنية الحديثة للنهوض بالقطاع الزراعي والصناعي، دعم وتقوية البيانات والتنسيق بين كافة الجهات ذات الصلة محليا وإقليميا وعالميا. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much to all the country speakers. This has been a very enriching conversation after the panels. I think what I really take away from your statements is that there clearly is a vision for the longer term, and there is action towards those visions. So we are already we're already on a good path, and this is really encouraging to hear. So back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much to Satu Santala and Honorable Minister Ali Beti. We appreciate your steering of the previous conversation. Earlier on, we heard from one of our panelists an impassioned plea for inclusion and mentioning specifically the youth and the youth's participation in agriculture. And they have the potential to be active and full participants as we go on this journey for food systems transformation. And so it gives me great pleasure right now to hear from the voice of the youth, Elizabeth Mwende, an agricultural engineer and youth representative, just to give us your impressions of what you have heard this morning, a call to action. It's always when you are in the youth, with the youth, that we are challenged and invited to reflect and imagine what the future could look like. Come through, please.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. Hello, everyone. I am privileged to be with you today to represent the youth community and to give our perspective in this very important topic on the means of implementation on food systems transformation. We are very much happy and glad to see that there's a general consensus on the need to involve everyone, and the fact that food systems transformation cannot happen from a siloed approach, but rather opening it up and involving everyone, not only in the planning phase, but rather the implementation phase, which is where we are all going to after this summit. Therefore, I cannot overemphasize the need to include the youth, not only because we want to be just inclusive, but rather because the youth are drivers of change. We may have had the opportunity to come over to our booth. We have been exhibiting our initiatives since day one. And in case any of us here has not yet had the opportunity, I still welcome you to come over and see what we are doing, and let us engage, have a conversation on how we can still collaborate after this summit. Young people are indeed bringing unique experiences from the ground based on our education background, our community work, as well as our unique perspectives. As such, this moment of stock-taking is a very crucial opportunity to renew commitment to engage the youth within national policies, commitments, and targets to rescue the achievement of a world without hunger. Although, from our observation, we realized 32% of the national pathways do not mention the youth at all. It's a very sad observation, indeed. It is time that the national leaders and the policy makers remap a route that involves the meaningful participation of the youth along the entire process. Moreover, we also realize that we need a mindset shift. We noticed that 36% of the countries that submitted their national pathways only view us, the youth, as beneficiaries and a vulnerable population that is just being affected by the negative impacts that are happening in the agricultural sector. So we need to move away from this, because this narrow representation of the youth limits our contribution to this entire process and limits us from looking at us as strategic assets within this process of food systems transformation. Tapping into our potential requires going beyond surface level engagements in meetings. We want to co-create and co-design this process with you, as well as looking at us as experts and solution providers. Lastly, while it is notable that at least 32% of the national pathways do actually propose youth transformative approaches to promoting youth engagement and employment in food systems, it would be crucial for us to now translate these commitments into tangible actions on the ground. And therefore, our call to action, we want to support the implementation of these pathways. And therefore, we hope for the following. 1, funding be availed to support youth-focused initiatives, implementing actions, supporting food systems transformation at the country level. 2, youth-led solutions in innovation, science and technology be considered as a key enabler in the implementation of national pathways. Finally, 3, the proposal of a standalone youth coalition be supported by the member states and other partners as a means of sustaining long-term engagement even after this summit, so that the member states can easily reach out to us, engage with us, connect with us, so that we can work together for the realization of the national pathways. In summary, the youth are energetic, we are ready to work with you, and I truly believe from my heart that it is only by working together that we can achieve the food systems that we all hope for. And also, consequently, we will be able to achieve together the SDGs, because the future of food is about us. And nothing about us is without us. Thank you.
Elizabeth, thank you very much for inspiring us, for challenging us and reminding us of what it means to be active and engaged global citizens. And I think another lesson that you've demonstrated here is how to get to the point in the time allocated. Thank you. Thanks so much. We are nearing the end of our session this morning. And before I come back for my closing remarks, I do want to invite the co-chairs to give us the closing statements on the means of implementation. So I go back to Satu Santala and Minister for Niger, Ali Beti. You have the floor.
Merci beaucoup. Après avoir écouté les différentes interventions, des États et aussi des autres acteurs, et notamment d'Elisabeth. Donc je dois dire que dans le cadre donc, du suivi de la mise en œuvre de la transformation des systèmes alimentaires, les 5 éléments clés qui ont été cités, notamment la finance, les financements, les innovations et les technologies, notamment le numérique, les données et les informations, le commerce, la liberté du commerce, mais aussi la gouvernance globale. Ces éléments doivent être considérés ensemble par l'ensemble des institutions, qu'elles soient nationales, régionales, internationales. Toutes les institutions doivent considérer ces éléments et l'ensemble de ces acteurs doivent travailler à assurer que ces éléments sont mis ensemble et c'est leur mise en commun ensemble qui va permettre d'obtenir la transformation des systèmes alimentaires que nous voulons. Donc cette transformation puissante vers des systèmes alimentaires plus durables, sensibles à la nutrition, équitables, qui assurent que l'ensemble des citoyens bénéficient des progrès de cette transformation. Comme ceci a été dit un certain nombre de fois, je voudrais que ce soit ma dernière phrase, le coût de l'action est moins élevé que le coût de l'inaction. Donc, il faudrait agir. Merci beaucoup. Je vous donne la parole, ma vice-présidente.
Yes, and I wanted to add 3 points. Some of them are overlapping and complementary. Listening to this lively conversation this morning, I am again reminded that we will not achieve the Agenda 2030 goals nor our climate goals unless we transform our food systems. And I think that sort of, it's kind of, it's a vision that we need to keep in mind and that we really need to work towards, and that we cannot be we cannot only be looking at the short-term issues and only address, for example, the humanitarian needs, but really need to look at the longer term and invest our means and energies into that. My second point is really the amazing interconnectedness of the means of implementation, and I've heard colleagues talk today about this being a transdisciplinary agenda and the need for integrated action and the need for involving everyone. And I think that's of course really important to remember. But it's a very big effort that we have ahead of ourselves, but as the minister rightly reminded us again, the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of action, and we really need to mobilize for this. And the third point I wanted to say is that it is really encouraging how much dialogues, connections are already happening, how many different voices are coming to this space, and that there's already a lot of action that is being taken. Of course, we're nowhere near where we need to be, so we need to mobilize additionally, both funds, but also other means of implementation, and we need to accelerate our work. We do need to work together, we do need to connect, and I think, just to echo Elizabeth's voice, that we do need to involve the youth in a meaningful manner and to do it right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honourable Minister Betty, and to you as well. Thank you, Satu Santala. So that brings us to the end of today's plenary, or this part of the proceedings. Thank you so very much for your engagements, your interventions, for respecting the time and the speakers, and for really making this time together meaningful. I've loved being your moderator as we delved into these crucial conversations on mobilizing means of implementation for food systems transformation. I wish you best wishes and goodwill as you go to your different offices, whether it is IFAD or the World Bank or in the area of activism, policy making, government. I send my best wishes as we try and do our best to transform our world. Thank you. Goodbye.